So, hello everybody. As I was about to say, you may not know me because I haven't been around for a little while. So if you're comparatively new, you may not have seen me before. Well, you might have seen me online. I used to appear as a big face on the wall sometimes. Anyway, as you'll know, if you were here last week, we're starting a new series called Radical Reality, which started last week with Vadanya. So to kick off the series, Vadanya told us that we've got it all wrong. We get it all wrong. According to the Buddha, we unenlightened beings are deeply deluded about the nature of things. It's not just that we've got things a bit wrong, we could sort of tinker around the edges and get it a bit right. We haven't got a clue. Our views are upside down, according to the Buddha. And you might have found that a shocking idea. And in fact, we had an alternative title for this series, which was Shocking Buddhist Ideas. And last week, Vadanya issued a warning. He said, prepare to be shocked. Prepare to be shocked by some of the following talks in the series. So tonight, I'm going to say some things about what Buddhism tells us about reality, about the nature of things that you might find shocking. You might even find them difficult to get your head around. They're so radically different from the way we've been conditioned to see the world. So yes, I'm going to be talking about the nature of reality. And when we talk about what Buddhism says about the nature of reality, we usually get some complaints. How is this relevant to me? What has this got to do with the way I live my life? So what has this got to do with the way we live our lives? It's got everything to do with it, absolutely everything. We've all got a model or a map of the nature of things in our mind, which tells us sort of what life's about, and that guides how we act. So how we see the world directly affects the way we live our life. I was going to say it completely affects the way we live our life. That's not quite true, because quite a lot of what we do is entirely due to completely unconscious, deep drives that have got nothing to do with anything to do with our reason. But to the extent that we are rational beings, then our model of the world determines how we act, our map of the world, the way we see the nature of things. And so if we use a different map, we live a different life. But most of us never, ever think about the way we see the world. We just take it for granted that the way we have been taught and conditioned to see things is just the way things are. We just take that completely for granted, which is why it can come as a bit of a shock to go to, say, a different country where the map is just subtly different. It's not hugely different, where, for example, it's perfectly okay to turn up an hour and a half late and nobody thinks there's a problem about it. They go, how can it be okay to turn up an hour and a half late? Well, it is if you've got a different map, actually. So we've been taught and conditioned, it's sort of soaked into our bones from our parents, from our society, from our education. And very often we never actually make ourselves conscious of our underlying assumptions about the way things are. So the way we live our life is determined by a load of assumptions that we've just picked up unconsciously. And never really thought about. This is part of the way that we live on automatic pilot. And of course, a big part of Buddhism is about let's not carry on living on automatic pilot. Let's make our choices. So that's part of the way we're conditioned by our past. And we want to break free from our past and create a new future. And to do that, we need to think about the way we've been conditioned and the way we see the world. We need to examine those assumptions. We need to think, hard as that is. I've been doing it today. It's absolutely exhausting. But one thing we can probably assume from last week's talk about the way we see the world is that it's completely wrong. Yeah, as I said, we all have a model or a map of the way things are in our head, even if we don't know it. If we don't know it, it's worse than knowing it because we can't question it then. And the main model that most of us have today was brought about, I think, arose from 19th century science, a great machine age. Everything was dominated by machines. And I'm told that at one point people said, well, there's nothing new to learn in physics. We've completely got the world sus. We absolutely know the way it works. And the world is like a sort of machine. It just gets on with it. This gives rise to a philosophy of materialism. Well, the philosophy of materialism is different from what we usually mean by materialism. It doesn't mean wanting loads of money and stuff. It means that thinking that what is ultimately real is matter. Matter is real, and things that come from matter like light. But mind, consciousness, those things, well, they're just a sort of accidental mist. They don't really exist in the same way that matter does. And the world around us is this sort of dead machine that just gets on with it, irrespective of, if you like, consciousness and mind. And I think this is my theory, I think this arose because the scientific method, quite rightly, tells us that if you're doing an experiment, you cannot take account of anything that can't be measured in some way. So you can't, it's not like, I've got a hunch that this is going to work, you can't take that into account. Hunches, that counts a lot. It's got to be like completely objective, nothing to do with our feelings or our hunches or our intuitions or anything. So we're doing an experiment, we completely rule out anything that can't be measured. And that's a good idea. If you're designing an aeroplane or a bridge or a medicine, if I'm flying on an aeroplane, I do not want its design to be based on somebody's hunch. I think this is going to work. Yeah? So it's a really, really, really good thing within its sphere. But it goes beyond its sphere. I think one of the ways that it's gone beyond its sphere, I think almost philosophically, there's been a move from, if you can't measure it, you can't take it into account in an experiment, to if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist. It doesn't really exist. So consciousness doesn't really exist. So that's philosophical materialism, that matter is what's real. The world is a dead machine. It's a very, very different view from most cultures that have existed through time, where the world has been viewed as alive, sort of impregnated with spirit of one sort or another. It's very different probably from our intuitions, if we remember what it was like to be a child, and we remember what it's like to go to places that seem loaded with atmosphere, whatever. And I think it's very contrary, actually. I think it's very contrary, as I say later, because the only thing that we absolutely know exists is our consciousness. From our consciousness, we've deduced the existence of something out there called matter, and then we think, well, my consciousness doesn't exist, but that does. And that's very, very contrary, it seems to me. We deduce the existence of matter and then think that our consciousness has arisen from that. So that's philosophical materialism. And it's the dominant sort of idea about the nature of things in our society. Because science is so successful, it really is successful. But it's got implications. If the world is a dead machine like this, it's got implications. There are no universal values. No universal values. How could there be? Machines don't have values. They're all human inventions. We might think, well, it's obvious compassion is a human value. It's obviously a universal human. No, it's just the one we like. There have been philosophers, very well-known philosophers, who have said, it's about power. And it's right for the powerful to exert their power over the weak. Compassion is for weaklings. Nietzsche. So, and how can I say that he's wrong if it's just a human invention? He's as right as I am. So there are no universal values. Someone else might think differently. There's no such objective thing as beauty in the world. The beauty we think we see is probably just because we've been taught that some things are beautiful or something like that. Those moments when we're in awe of the world, well, that's just some sort of delusion. There's no real beauty. Our sense of mystery and awe that we get in the world, in nature, it's just an illusion. There's nothing mysterious. There's nothing mysterious about the machine. There's nothing that we could respond to like that. Another implication would be it's perfectly okay to exploit the world and nature in any way we like, because it's just dead. So, don't matter. Another would be that, well, meditation might calm us down or do something like that, but it can't open us up to higher truths that go beyond our sort of normal state. I mean, any sort of visionary experience or mystical experience, just sort of pathological aberration in the mind, probably because we've been eating something that was a bit moldy or something like that. There's certainly no possibility of continuity of consciousness beyond death, because when the brain dies, the consciousness ceases. And I think that if we lived according to that, we would live a very grey life, just looking at the surface of things. So last week, I think, Bodhinaga, if I remember rightly, Bodhinaga gave the analogy, Plato's analogy for our existence of Plato's cave. So Plato's cave, the image is that there's a group of prisoners in a cave facing a wall. And there's all sorts of interesting things going behind them in a sunlit world, but all they see is the shadows moving on the wall. And they think those shadows are all that there is. They don't turn around and look at what's going on behind them. So they're just seeing shadows on a wall. And they think there's nothing going on outside the cave. There's no deeper or higher dimension to reality, to existence. And that's what we do if we're materialists. We just look at the surface of things and say the surface of things is what there is. There's no depths behind it. So as I say, just to sum up a bit, most of us have been strongly conditioned to think that matter is all that is real, or what's really real, and that mind is a sort of vapor created by brain chemistry. But this leaves us in a dead world, a world that's a dead machine where there can be no real meaning, in which beauty or any significance that we may find is just our invention, and you could uninvent it. There's no scope in that world for spiritual transformation, not in any depth. If the world is a machine and you and I are machines, we're programmed to be the way we are. We can't really change. This is a very, very boring world indeed, a very boring and depressing world indeed. And if that is our world, we aren't going to really believe it's worth throwing ourselves into spiritual practice. What's the point? Might as well just have another cup of tea. I don't know, just sort of enjoy it while it lasts, and then we're gone. So this materialist philosophy gives rise to, I think, a very boring approach to life. But it's not even scientific. It's not even scientific. Not anymore. It might have looked scientific in the 19th century. It's very difficult to talk about this, but quantum physics, for example, modern physics, quantum physics seems to point to a role for the observer, in other words, to mind, in determining how matter behaves, certainly at a subatomic level. I mean, I haven't got time to go into this, and I'm probably not qualified to go into this, but it seems to point to the idea that matter only exists as matter when it's observed by a mind. Until then, it sort of exists as a cloud of probability that just collapses when it's observed. You might have heard of Schrödinger's cat. And just today, it was announced that the Nobel Prize for Physics had gone to 3 physicists who, for their work on quantum entanglement, okay? Quantum entanglement. Now, quantum entanglement, 2 particles, photons, usually, are somehow they're entangled. I don't quite know what that means, but they're entangled. I think they're split, anyway, they're entangled. What you find is that you can put them as far apart as you like, other sides of the universe, and they sort of exist as these clouds of probability. If you find out something about one of them, that affects the other one instantaneously across any distance you like. Einstein called this ghostly action at a distance, and he said quantum mechanics must be wrong because if it's right, you could get ghostly action at a distance. But the trouble is, there is ghostly action at a distance. It's been proved to exist. So it's suggested, there's lots of sort of philosophizing around the implications of modern physics, but it's been suggested that this could mean that our whole idea of location, of separation in space, is a delusion. It's completely delusional, the whole existent idea of separation, extension. So that's just one example of the strange world of modern physics, okay? The only thing modern physics tells us about the nature of reality is that it is stranger than we can imagine. And those aren't my words. Those are words of a friend of mine who was a professor of physics. So, as the title of the talk says, the title of the talk is "The World is Alive and Science Doesn't Have All the Answers." Science doesn't have all the answers. Modern science actually raises more questions than it answers, than it gives us answers. I was reading a book that was called More Than Matter. It was actually by a Christian philosopher. It's called More Than Matter. It's making some of the same points that I'm making. One of the things he says, I would have more patience with materialists if they had the faintest idea what matter is, which I thought was quite a telling point, really. So, okay, what does the Dharma say about all this? Well, in early Buddhism, it's taken for granted that the world we perceive around us is, as it were, an expression of our mental states. We heard earlier in the year about the Wheel of Life, various realms on the Wheel of Life that are expressions of our mental state. And they're seen as, places we could exist in. In higher states of meditation, they're actually seen as entering other dimensions where we could, other higher dimensions, which could even be inhabited by higher beings of light. So that was sort of there as a general sort of mindset in early Buddhism. And then the first line of the Dhammapada, probably the most respected single early Buddhist text, the first line, experiences are preceded by mind, led by mind, and produced by mind. Not by matter, by mind. So it was very much there in early Buddhism. And then in later Buddhism, well, it goes just loads further. So we get a school arising called the Yogacara, the way of practice, or sometimes called the Chittamatra, which means literally mind only. And this is the main philosophical view, I think, of Far Eastern Buddhism, this Yogacara view. Probably most Buddhists who've ever existed have been deeply influenced by this worldview. And the worldview of the Yogacara is that the world around us, what we see around us, is the product of mind. The apparently material world around us is created, caused, maybe by a sort of great mind. I mean, Sangha talks quite a lot in his seminar about the one mind that we're actually all got some sort of access to. The Lankavatara Sutra, one of the Yogacara texts, is, in that the Buddha is reported as saying, "My teaching is based on the recognition that the objective world, like a vision, is a manifestation of mind itself." The objective world, like a vision, is a manifestation of mind itself. We can't ascribe that to the historical Buddha, because this is a much later sutra, and when it says it's the words of the Buddha, maybe not, but maybe coming from some higher dimension of wisdom. But the recognition that the objective world, like a vision, is a manifestation of mind itself. So it's not that brains give rise to mind, it's like mind gives rise to everything, including brains. What an absurd idea. What an absurd idea. We are so conditioned by our usual way of thinking that it probably does seem quite absurd. But, well, let me quote Bertrand Russell, quite very eminent British philosopher. "Those who are unaccustomed to philosophical speculation," us, "those who are unaccustomed to philosophical speculation may be inclined to dismiss such a doctrine as obviously absurd. There is no doubt that common sense regards tables and chairs and the sun and the moon as material objects generally, and material objects generally as something radically different from minds, and as having an existence which might continue if minds ceased. We think of matter as having existed long before there were any minds. But whether true or false, idealism is the opposite of materialism. It's the idea that what there is mind, is not to be dismissed as obviously absurd. We can never prove the existence of things other than our experiences. In dreams, a very complicated world may seem to be present, and yet on waking we find that the sense data in the dream do not appear to have corresponded with physical objects. In other words, in a dream we create sometimes a very, very complex and realistic world around us. He goes on to say, very many philosophers, perhaps the majority, have held that there is nothing real except minds and their ideas. So, not absurd. And even an eminent astrophysicist, such as Sir Arthur Eddington, said, to put the conclusion crudely, the stuff of the world is mind stuff. The mind stuff of the world is something more general than our individual conscious minds, but we may think of its nature as not altogether foreign to feelings in our consciousness. Wow. So we may think that the world being in some way like our minds, even as maybe having feelings like our mind. The world is alive and not a dead machine. And this is an astrophysicist speaking, not some hippie like Vadanya, or ex-hippie like Vadanya. So one of the great founders of this tradition, the Yogacara tradition, the mind-only tradition, was somebody called a Sangha who lived in the 4th century. And a Sangha meditated for 12 years in a cave. And in this cave, it is said that, well, he reported that he had visions. He went to a higher realm, the Tushita heaven, in his meditations, where he was taught by the future Buddha, Maitreya. And it's those teachings that became the Yogacara doctrine, which went on to transform the lives of many, many, many millions of people. So for the materialist, a Sangha's sandals are real, but his visions of Maitreya aren't. But nobody cares about the Sangha's sandals. But loads of people have had their lives transformed by those visions. Those visions to a materialist are, as I said, probably the result of eating some phony mushrooms or something that he shouldn't have done. They're probably something to do with an aberration of the brain. So Yeah, and he founded the mind only tradition. So the Yogacara view, I mean, Sangha actually talks about this in his seminar. He says, well, it may not be quite right, but mind only is a much better basis for life than matter only. And it might not be quite right, but it's a much better basis than matter only. And if you want to lead a spiritual life, then matter only just doesn't work. So you might as well go for mind only. But I actually think that the truly orthodox Buddhist view is not that matter gives rise to mind or mind gives rise to matter. They co-arise. They arise together. They're two sides of the same coin. Have you ever experienced them separately? They're two sides of the same coin. We never experience one without the other. What there is a non-dual perceptual situation, which is quite difficult to get our head around, but there is a non-dual perceptual situation from which both mind and matter are abstractions. They're abstract ideas, abstract concepts, and, shocking Buddhist idea, abstract concepts do not actually exist. They're created by our sort of, what should we say, our symbol logic, if you like. I think the Pukka Buddhist view is that mind and matter arise together. They're two sides of the same coin. And so, for example, in the Pali Canon, Ananda, the Buddha's main attendant, is asked by somebody, which comes first, name and form? This is in the Wheel of Life. Name and form, or consciousness? So name and form really stands for matter, the material body. And is it that matter gives rise to mind, consciousness, or does consciousness give rise to matter? And Ananda answers neither. They are like two sheaves of wheat which lean against each other. And if you take one of them away, you no longer have a stack of wheat. So Ananda is saying pretty much what I am saying, that they're not, they're not different things. So it's not you can say one gives rise to the other and the other gives rise to that. They arise together. They're two sides of the same coin. Well, I can't prove any of this. I can't prove that mind is real. I can't prove that we don't live in this material world. But we do have a choice, don't we? We do have a choice. We can live in a dead, grey world where our existence is a meaningless accident, where there is no deeper meanings, no higher values, and no higher purpose. Or we can live in a vivid world where our experience has real meaning and our life and what we do has real meaning, where there's a deeper dimension to things, where we can not just look at the shadows on the wall, but turn around and see something else going on. So, well, there's a problem, isn't there? Because I mean, I spent ages being educated in sciences. I spent 6 years at university where if you questioned the materialist viewpoint, you'd be howled down. So we've all probably been deeply infected with the dead machine viewpoint. How do we bring the world alive? How do we start to live so that we can live a more vivid and deep life? Well, okay, one obvious way is to be open to the idea that there's a deeper dimension to life, and not just to dismiss it we can dismiss anything without reason. Open to the idea there's a deeper dimension. The surface is not all there is. Don't fall for the idea that we've explained everything. Of course we haven't. See this as the improbable, miraculous mystery that it is. What's it all about? I have no idea. Secondly, meditate. So be open to that. Secondly, meditate. Meditation changes you. Stick at it, it changes you. Meditation opens our eyes to the beauty of the world, for a start. Opens our eyes to the beauty of things. It connects us to the world around us. And it just seems to be magically bring the world more alive. It seems to magically undermine that sort of nihilistic, materialistic take on things. The Dharma tells us that we see the world most clearly when we're in the clearest, best, most positive mental states. And the Dharma puts us in those states. The meditation puts us in those states. And when we're in those states, the world looks a lot more magical and beautiful and much less like a machine, like a dead machine. So be open to the idea there's a deeper dimension. Meditate. Take meditation experiences seriously. Never think they are, that's just in the mind. It's very easy to sort of dismiss. No, they're just in the mind. They're real. And be open to the idea that they can be an experience of a higher dimension of being. Even maybe of higher beings, as in Maitreya's case. So, be open, meditate, take meditation seriously, spend time in nature, out of the concrete world that we have created. Spend time in nature, especially alone, and especially alone at night. And you will get a sense of the magical, mysterious nature of reality. The living nature of the world becomes much more apparent. Spend time offline, away from the prison of abstract, non-existent ideas that we've created and that most people live in, so that we're more in touch with actually what's real and not this abstract castles of abstract ideas in the air. We can spend so much time in that it just imprisons us. We just think there's nothing else. Next one might seem a bit weird, but pay attention to atmosphere, the atmosphere of places, the sort of intuitions we pick up from places. Primitive people would think that places have a sort of spirit, and I think places have a sort of spirit that we can pick up on. Why not be open to that? It just brings the world alive for us. So that can be true of places in nature, places in the world. It can also be true of buildings. I mean, have you never been into a church or a shrine room and just thought, I could cut this atmosphere with a knife? There's something about the mental states of people who've been practicing here maybe for hundreds of years that I can feel. I felt it not that long ago. We were in the North York Moors. We went to a church in Lastingham, which I think Edward's been to. And you go down into the crypt of that church, which was the old church, and it's like, it just hits you. It just hits you. People have been practicing here. They've been using a different tradition, but they've been seriously practicing for hundreds and hundreds of years, and you can feel it. And you can feel it in some shrine rooms. It works the other way as well. I remember standing on a hill in Spain and just feeling this horror. And then I saw that there was an abattoir down below, and they started to lead a bunch of pigs into this abattoir. And I thought, I can really feel this. And I don't think I'm inventing it. I can really feel this. There's a horror here. So, I think these intuitions, these things we pick up, they're real. They're real. So pay attention to atmosphere. And if you want to bow to a grove of trees or a sunset or a view, bow to it. I remember the first time I did this. It's the product of meditating. I hadn't thought about any of this stuff. I hadn't been meditating. And I found myself out in the Peak District. And there was a view. And I'd been resisting bowing in pujas because I don't do that sort of thing. And I just felt I had to bow to this view. And it felt so right and liberating, actually, to do that. So if you want to bow to a view or a grove of trees, do it. And lastly, I would say take dreams and coincidences seriously. They might be telling you something. The world might be a lot more mysterious than you think, and you might be telling you something. So I'm going to round off with a poem, which I think it's by Seamus Heaney, I think. And I will say something about this poem, because he talks about the hole in reason's ceiling. I don't think it's necessarily a particularly good poem, but it's making the point that I'm making. He talks about the hole in reason's. He talks about the hole in reason's ceiling. So the hole in reason's ceiling implies that you at least get up to the ceiling. Okay, it doesn't mean that's the hole in reason's floor. It means we're talking about not being irrational. We're talking about using reason as much as we can, partly to see the limits of reason, not just any old sort of superstitious nonsense. So he talks about the hole in reason's ceiling, and he's talking about common sense. The poem is called "To Hell with Common Sense." I think it was Oscar Wilde described common sense as the inherited stupidity of the race. So I'm sort of thinking it means that prudent materialist view that, you look after livelihood above all else, what people would normally think of as common sense. Things like possessions and security at the top of our agenda. So to hell with common sense. More kicks than pence we get from common sense. Dreadful rhyming, but anyway. Above its door is writ, all hope abandon. It is a bank will refuse a post-dated check on the Holy Ghost. We want no secular wisdom plodded together by concerned fools. Let them wear out nerve and bone, those that would have it that way. But in the end, nothing that they have achieved will be in the shake-up, in the final wake-up. And I have a feeling that through the hole in reason's ceiling, we can fly to knowledge without ever going to college. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vadanya. Yeah, just